And good afternoon, everyone. This is Mr. Richmond, and I am here to share the knowledge. That's right, the knowledge about, I'm going in the wrong folder, the knowledge about plants. And today, specifically, I want to talk to you about non-vascular plants. So if I can find my notes real quick, which I probably should have done before I started this video, because I am wasting your time. And I, unfortunately, am not seeing my notes. Okay. Well, maybe not. Let's try these. That's kind of sad, really. Yeah. Okay, guys, good afternoon. This is Mr. Richmond, and I am here with you today, sitting on my front porch. I'm going to talk to you about non-vascular plants today. Unfortunately, I have an old set of my old notes, but the old notes kind of look like the new notes, and they'll do. Just real quick, I want to talk to you about the idea that non-vascular plants, what makes them so different from a vascular plant is that they don't have the tubes that we talked about vascular plants having. They don't have the xylem and the phloem tubes. And instead of moving water and nutrients and the food throughout the plant using those tubes, instead they absorb water and nutrients. And when we talk about absorption or something absorbing something, a substance, I like to think of like a spill, maybe a small spill, and taking a paper towel and just kind of laying over it, or a sponge maybe, and that water just kind of moves into the fibers or is absorbed into the fibers of the towel or the sponge, right? And it's kind of a slow process, you know, especially if it was a big spill and it had to spread out through the entire paper towel. It always does that. And so you know, that's absorption, and that's what these plants have to do. They don't have the tubes, so they have to absorb in the water and the nutrients. They also really don't have any true, what we would consider to be roots or stems or even leaves. And that sounds kind of crazy for a plant to not have that. Now, it's not to say that they don't have different types of structures. I couldn't think my word. Structures in place to do this. They do, but they don't really have what we call a true root system, stems or leaves. These non-vascular plants tend to live in damp places, and probably what makes them really interesting to me is that being that they don't have tubes, they have to literally pass water and nutrients from cell to cell to cell. And in class we talked about a bucket brigade. Using buckets to put out a fire versus using a water hose. And we know passing buckets from person to person to put out a fire would be much slower and much less efficient than just using a water hose. And so the non-vascular plant would be more like a bucket brigade, where you have to pass from one cell to another, you know, the bucket passing from one person to the other, the same kind of idea. Whereas a vascular plant would be like the water hose, where you just use that hose to move large volumes of water in a short amount of time. So non-vascular plants, again, no tubes. What do? They have to pass the water and nutrients from cell to cell, and that takes some time. And being that it takes time, that doesn't allow them to be very tall, very large. They tend to be small plants, and probably the best example would be like moss. You know, you go out in the woods and you see moss, and you know moss isn't very tall. It can spread out like a carpet, but it doesn't grow up, you know, several feet into the air. So, you know, moss is a good example. And then finally, the last thing about non-vascular plants, instead of getting a new plant from a seed by planting a seed in the ground, they don't have seeds. They use spores. And they have these little spores that develop on the surface of the plant, and the wind will pick those spores up, or they'll be washed away into the soil through rainwater And so, and that's how, if that spore ends up in the right conditions, you'll get a new plant. So, again, non-vascular plants, the characteristics, they do not have tubes. The water and nutrients, because there are no tubes, have to be absorbed from cell to cell. They tend to live in damp places because they need that moisture, because it takes so long to absorb the water they need. No true root stems or leaves, and they tend to be pretty small. And again, the best example would be the mosses. And again, they don't reproduce using seeds, but rather spores. So those are your non-vascular plants. That's just a real quick overview, and hopefully that helped you. And we'll see you back in class.